Hey guys, welcome back to another edition of the Dead Simple Podcast with your boy Jamie, Hey Daddy, whatever you want to call me. Today my guest is Ladna, and him and I get into a lot of different things, but it mostly revolves around the International Doom League, which was a competitive CTF league that took place on the source port ZDaemon in the mid-2000s. Our conversation would shift back and forth between the International Doom League, the ZDaemon administration, and generally the era of about 2005 to current, but the conversation largely was based from 2005 to about 2012, 2013. We did talk about some really other popular players like Ralphus. We talked about Odamex. We talked about Odamex development. We talked about some of the things that Ladna is doing. We talked about other controversial figures like his brother No Star. Overall, it's a pretty good listen. I would say that, I would listen to the podcast that Human Bones and Ralphus and did. I'll put that in the description. And with that said, I really hope you guys enjoy this because this does take a very, very deep dive into what was the problem culturally with competitive Doom at that time. We didn't touch on everything, but we touched on really big aspects of that. So again, Ladna, competitive player, coder, developer, administrator for the International Doom League, and just a generally nice guy. Once again, guys, I thank you for listening and enjoy this podcast. Okay, so I'm here with Ladna, a longtime Doom player, but more importantly, more known for his contribution to the game itself in both the form as a player, but as I had hinted to earlier, more importantly known for some of the contribution he made as a coder and a developer for IDL stats and other stuff along that line. So I want to bring him in. Say hi, Ladna.
Hi. Hey.
Now, are you okay? We talked a little bit before this. Are you okay with us using our real names in the recording?
Yeah,
okay.
No problem.
So Ladna's name is Charlie. You all know I'm Jamie. So as we talk with each other, we're just going to refer as our first names. I'm super excited to do this.
Yeah.
Because I think that you have a very unique story and a relatively untold one. Because you did a lot of, I'm not going to say grunt work, but very important work for the IDL in terms of getting our stats.
Yeah.
So it's like a really you're like an unsung hero because for a long time, based on what I've been told by Ralph and others, prior to your ZD stack program, which was which is the program that you wrote through Python, they were like doing stats by hand.
Yep. Yeah, and it was really like flags, touches. It wasn't you can like do frags before they did the point system with the new 1.0 after that you had to manually count. So we wanted more like a more full experience. Like if you look like the NFL or like any other sort of major league sports, they have just tons of stats or like sabermetrics and things like that. And it really enhances the experience of the sport. And it just seemed like a natural thing to do. And not just that, but like, demos and videos and screenshots and all the different sort of narratives and stuff. We thought it'd be like a really integral part of the Doom experience.
Right. And I think before we get into because I'm going to have a lot of questions because there's a lot of stuff about coding that I don't understand. And then there's a lot of things about the politics of doing this because we didn't have access to the source port that we were using. So you were having to use like basically foreign software to make this work because we were never going to be able to use software that we could use with the program itself, ZDaemon, which is the source port itself, because their closed source program and their administration is, as I have stated on several other podcasts and as many people may well or will not be aware, their administration, we'll say, is flawed for now.
They were uncooperative and unreceptive to what we were trying to do. Uninterested in what we were trying to do.
And it was purely out of political bullshit.
Sure,
and it was a classic case of they were cutting off their nose to spite their face. It was out of spite. It was 100% driven out of spite. It would have been it would have behooved them to cooperate with us because we were bringing their port activity.
New people joined Doom specifically to play IDL.
Yeah. And they just didn't care.
Yeah, well, I mean, they really hated Ralphus.
Yeah.
He's a mean guy.
Which he's not, by the way. Like, he's actually
not.
like a really chill, like, easygoing dude.
He's one of my favorite, like, Doom personalities. I love Ralphus to death. Like, he was really good to me. He was really good for the community. Like, he's not perfect, but yeah, I think he's just a great guy. If you're in a disagreement with Ralphus and, like, it gets personal, you're probably the asshole. That's probably how it's going.
Yeah. And that was their mentality 100%, like you said. I mean, it was so bad that there was a point, and Ralph and Human Bones just did a podcast and they talked about this at great length, so I'll just summarize it. And it's a well-known story within the Doom community, but maybe not to other outsiders. But there was a point, and this would have been by about 2010, 2011, where, okay, you know what? I just realized we've got to go backstory before we tell this.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah, because there's a lot of because if I tell the story, people are going to be just like, what? I don't know. So we'll go back on that. But you know what? We also took off really fast, which is fucking cool. But how about you go ahead and introduce yourself? Because I kind of gave you a shitty introduction, but tell me about yourself.
No.
Kind of when you came around to the community, because like I feel like one day you just appeared, and it was like talking to somebody that had been in the Doom community for like 10 years already. And I remember that being maybe around 2005, 2006, but correct me if I'm wrong.
Man, I'm fuzzy with dates. Let me think about when that might have been. I think I started playing ZDaemon maybe, in 2005. That seems, maybe 2006-ish. Played a bunch of pub. Was really only interested in CTF. The team thing is amazing, like the dynamics are good. Plus, I'm super bad at killing stuff, so like the strategy was I could be more effective that way. Like it was more engaging, and yeah, just sort of got more involved. My brother and I, No Star, would play a lot, just kind of like in the same room or whatever. And yeah, the community was really fascinating. We had shitty computers, so we couldn't play modern games. But like Doom, even to this day, like ZDaemon or whatever, Capture the Flag, is very different than almost every other game you'll play. It's so much faster. The weapon balance is so much different, or so different. Like the strategies as a result are so different. Yeah, I memean, people like the modern Doom, whatever it is, like Doom Rejuvenated or whatever the latest one, Doom Eternal, excuse me. It just is Quake, right? Like the physics are all just slow Doom, which is Quake, and like, yeah, it's fine. I'm not like bitter about it, but like Doom is something very special, and I think like as I got deeper into it, like I just wanted to sort of, make it my life in a weird way,
right?
Yeah. So anyway, I got involved in like Capture the Flag and stuff, and I kind of got good. And wanted to join IDL and do some of the Priv stuff that like DX and UD were getting together. And I'm not very good at Doom. Like I'm better than most people, but like in terms of like IDL skill and stuff, I'm like a middle of the road third. But like the way I could really contribute to the community was like hosting servers, doing a lot of the admin stuff, and like you were saying earlier, like doing a lot of the stats and the dev stuff for it. So that's kind of like my biggest contribution was that. And I guess some of the stuff I'm most proud of was some of the governance stuff. Like I was on the IDL board for a long time. Mm-hmm. I was even an interim commissioner for a hot second.
Really?
Yeah. Ralphus had to, I forget, he got a job or something. And so he had to like bow out. And yeah, I was IDL's worst commissioner for a while.
Bones might argue with you about that one. By the way, I'm on good terms with him, but he always says that. So he'll think that's funny. All right, go ahead. Sorry.
Commissioner is an impossible job. The only person who could ever do it is Ralphus. That's the way it goes. Human Bones did a great job with a bunch of strong personalities, including me. So like I did. That's what I feel like my contribution was. Like I was a fine player, and I would show up and try to like recruit people and whatever. But mostly it was just like trying to be the sort of like a chief of staff of IDL, basically. Get people in line, wrangle with No Star, wrangle with Chain Dude, wrangle with White Boy, get them to fucking show up and whatever. And yeah, try to make rules that, people would think were going to fix all their problems.
Right.
Of course, never did.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting to look back at it that way. I think the important thing too is we're looking back on this now as people in their 30s, but at the time we were in our late teens, early 20s, and we had these interests and these goals to develop a competitive community, and I was never involved with most of that stuff. I was just a player more or less. But that's the thing too. Even the people that were on the IDL board, the commissioner himself, were still players with competitive interests. So it was, and it is, it's like the embodiment of the Doom spirit. We are, I'm not going to use the word hobbyists, but we aren't getting paid to do this.
Right.
And
Yeah.
we do this because we love it, and we do it on our own. So we're like this awkward independent hobbyist that makes our own league. In many cases, now especially, we develop our own ports, and then we compete in them. So it's all done by ourselves, and in that entangled web is the complicated mess that is humanity.
Yes.
And there's just, when I talk about the IDL, I always talk about it with like this glowing review, and obviously in many ways I'm lionizing the league that had a lot of problems. There were a lot of issues in it, but it's not so much to say that it's because of the people running it. It's not for that reason. It's just more because of what I had said prior. We were doing it our own. We were making it on our own, and then we were playing in it. So there were a lot of kind of almost conflict of interest issues that came up, and that was a huge thing going on. And that is like, I think if you had to describe the IDL, it was just like one big walking conflict of interest for almost for almost 10 years. And we made it work, but my God, the stories that came along with it are funny, epic, legendary, however you want to describe it now. But at the time, holy shit.
Oh, man.
We were consumed by it.
Yeah, definitely. Some of the conversations, though, Star and I had, like over hours, days, weeks, and months. Yeah, it was just all consuming.
And it's like, that's why I find someone like you really fascinating, because you're somebody that you were involved in this on multiple levels. Like you said, you were a player, and I think you were a pretty good player.
Thanks.
I think if you had gotten on the right team, and I think you were, there were definitely a couple of teams now that I remember that you were part of them. Like that team probably could have won. But there was a FLS team that had like you, LB, and Russian Dumbass. And like on paper, that team just looks amazing, but it just like never kind of came through. And there's probably a lot of reasons for that. But
yeah. I mean, if I'm on a team, it probably won't win a Master Bowl. Like,
I disagree.
I'm really good on some maps. Other maps, I am complete trash. And like, really, a team that wins a Master Bowl is like, if you look at the teams that won, they have like flawless records, right? They maybe lost once. And you certainly, of course, can't lose in the playoffs. And like, that was never going to be a situation with me, because like, there are just maps I will lose for us. And like, we're going to get like the bad seed in the playoffs. We won't get our home field. And then we like have to play suck on map 8, and we're toast, right? Like, too bad. I think there were like some things we probably could have changed league-wise to fix that. But like you were saying, I think trying to fix the rules for everything is hard, because you always know who's going to benefit and who won't benefit. And because like your players on the board, you can kind of do like a couple things. And we try to do this stuff. One, be like transparent about like, yeah, we know that like if we have one server set, this is good for Jkist and terrible for Mantis. That sucks. But we think overall, like having a static server set is better, because we just don't have server arguments. We're done. I think that was wrong, by the way. And then you can also say, you can have other people from like all kinds of parts of Doom on the board. Like Mantis was on the board, I was on the board, Ralphus was on the board, Mike was on the board, and then Do from Europe for a long time, and then Bones. I think I got everybody. Gilgamesh and maybe Fastidious once. I don't know.
Wasn't Mass on it too?
Maybe.
Maybe towards the end, right?
Maybe towards the end or like at the beginning or something. Yeah. But yeah, so you get like a diversity of opinions in it and just try to like, make sure everyone has a voice. But yeah, like every policy, there are winners and losers, and you just try to be transparent about it. And I think like we could have changed rules to make it so that to try to like shoot down super teams or try to shoot down like the trade deadline and like try to get a super team and like, because there was a lot of drama about like trying to suck, the good players off of other teams or try to get captains, and like basically when you get someone to be a captain to say you can get a really good team by doing this and blah blah blah. It's just we always said like the way to solve this is just to get more people playing Doom, which feeds back into like Odamex dev or developing our own port or something like that. But in the meantime, it's like, well, yeah, and we just have all these fights all the time, and it wasn't wonderful. But
for sure.
I do think that like it was fun, and it's important to remember like there weren't a lot of examples of like competitive gaming leagues at the time.
No, there were not.
It was like the early days of QuakeCon, right? And so, yeah, I just think like there weren't a lot of examples. There was no money involved. We were all, like you said, young. And I think like Doom doesn't attract the most balanced of people at the most stable parts of their lives.
Sure.
So yeah, I just think all that stuff was sort of working against us, and like given all that, I think we did pretty well. I mean, I had a lot of fun.
Yeah, for sure. There's a lot of conversation I can talk about this for hours. And I think there's a couple of things that you said in there that are pretty spot on. I mean, the big one is that we didn't have a model for what a competitive esports league looked like yet. Esports in the early to mid 2000s, if you said something like that, you'd have been laughed at.
Right.
Like, that's not something for most people. And now it's like you see the big League of Legends tournaments, the big Overwatch tournaments, I'm sure I'm missing other games where,
StarCraft 2.
Yeah, these teams are competing literally for millions of dollars.
Yeah.
And in our time, that wasn't a thing. Like gaming houses, things like that. We didn't have anything like that. We were competing from the confines of our own homes, and we were limited. For example, you had mentioned something like the server set, I believe Total Trash was in Iowa. Or maybe Chicago.
In St. Louis.
Was it St. Louis?
Chicago.
Okay, Chicago, you're right. And so players like me who practically get like a straight routing to Chicago, and I have basically the lowest ping that you can have that doesn't rival a LAN ping but comes pretty close. J-Kiss, that benefited someone like J-Kiss. That benefited a lot of players. But then it was players like Mantis who were completely fucked by that, right? So
right, or like we have players in like Georgia.
Or European players. Like, and the old versions of ZDaemon, contrary to the newer versions of the different ports, high ping was very unforgiving.
Yeah.
It wasn't like if you played on old versions of ZDaemon or Odamex. Well, Odamex wasn't really good at that point. Or Skulltag at the time, which is now Zandronum. If you had high ping, like you were relegated to being a runner. There was no way you could defend. There was no way you could be accounted on to be any sort of fragging position because you just were at too much of a disadvantage. And that's different now because a lot of the ports have solved that problem. So like you could come into a game and have 150 ping, and yes, you're gonna still be at a disadvantage, but it's just not what it used to be. Like it was like you probably shouldn't play. To put it into perspective, I think the IDL maybe only had one team in a ZDaemon era that won a championship with a European player as their starter, and that was actually one of your brother's teams.
Yeah, Grossman.
Yeah, and I can't think of any other ones. There's been really good teams like Nero and Fluffles, but I don't think they ever won. And but Do wasn't a starter. He was a fourth for that team.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's interesting because we're playing from home, right? Like and we're
Yeah.
playing with all of these advantages and disadvantages, and we're mixing and meshing them up as best as we can, all while not having a model for like what competitive esports looks like. So we're kind of basing what we're doing off of the only sort of frame of reference we have for competition, and that's professional sports in the United States of America. You
Well,
know,
yeah, and I think like a little bit like Clan Wars,
yeah,
like whatever like the Clan Wars scene was in the early days of ZDaemon, like where you would like pick maps or negotiate stuff ahead of time and stuff like that. Um, yeah, or like a number of players in the Capture the Flag team. Yeah, but yeah, mostly like professional sports and Clan Wars.
yeah. And so I had mentioned as I was going on and talking about this that I looked at you as you were very interesting, intriguing because you were a player, and I think a
Mm,
good player, and we could agree to disagree on that.
okay.
Um, then you were on the board, so you had a lot of influence on how the league looked. And
Mm.
one of the players who is a very polarizing figure in IDL history, No Star. Um, he's a player that by the community and by many people was seen as somebody that, yeah, tried to bend and twist the rules his way to get him on winning teams or to make winning teams be built around him. And
Oh
I'm
yeah.
not, look, I mean, it is what it is. I'm not here to throw out accusations. I'm not here to debate.
I mean, feel free to accuse. I will tell you whatever you want to know.
Well, no, we all know. Like it's not a secret. Like it's not like No Star was shy about it. He was very blatant. That was
Yeah, he
kind
would
of
tell you.
that was and is the NS attitude. It was
Yeah,
that, yeah, if you're not doing everything you can to win, then you're not trying to win. And that's he wasn't, look, like No Star not only would do that for himself, he would tell other people you should do this because there's nothing in the rules that are stopping you from doing it. And even if they were, they're loosely based off of precedent and you could probably get it thrown out anyway. And
yeah,
and so it's like, yeah, like that's a really polarizing thing. But I also think that at the time, we didn't know what fierce competition really looked like for a league. We largely looked at it from the standpoint and through the lens of clan wars, which doesn't translate well to leagues because there's a lot of issues with clan wars. And I think
sure.
players like No Star and the NS guys that came in and built their teams and won, they became like the favorite like heel. Like everybody hated them and everybody wanted to beat them. So they drove competition. My stance on No Star, and I will be very honest with you, I like
Please.
him. I wish I could talk to him again because I always thought very highly of him. I would love to have No Star back. I would love to have you back playing. It would be awesome. But my stance on No Star is I think he was good for the short term, but probably bad for the long term. Um, he drove up competition insanely. Competition felt very good when No Star was involved. If you beat No Star, it was like an accomplishment in and of itself.
Right, like a cultural, like the people have spoken, you know?
Yeah. Um, the problem is that there were a lot of things that No Star did that probably chased away new players.
Yeah,
And it made the league very hard to grow for new players because he pushed policies and pushed ideas that created super teams and really created when we had an otherwise balanced amount of players, the teams oftentimes ended up being very unbalanced. And that's not solely because of No Star, but he was a proponent of that. And in my mind, representative in some ways of that and that idea and that line of thinking of win at all costs probably stunted our growth. And we're already fighting an uphill battle because we're an old game that's dying
yeah,
and we can't really pick and choose who we get as players. Like we have to take whatever we get. And when we're just kicking them off the mountain when they're trying to climb on because they're not good enough at that time, and that's the
yeah.
way that league was. That was the mentality of the IDL, and that was the embodiment of like the No Star culture. It was kill or be killed, and these are the words that Ralph used exactly in a podcast about the IDL. And
Oh
that
no,
attitude
100%.
was
Yeah,
great at the time for competition. It felt fucking awesome,
yeah. It's
but
addictive.
in the long term, like was very bad for the game, I think.
Well, I would go further. I would say that I think so. You were around in ZDaemon before me, and I
Hmm.
think you would agree that like a lot of like ZDaemon culture and like competitive Doom culture is toxic,
Oh yeah, for
right?
sure.
So, like the stuff like people say to each other, or like the kinds of like actions people take, and no one's blameless here. Like I
Exactly.
imagine if I looked at some of my logs, I just cringe until I died. But I think it's like hard to not internalize that culture. And then even if you're able to do that, to try to like push against it.
Sure.
I think one of IDL's greatest accomplishments was like destroying clans, right? Because
Yeah.
clans were really toxic, and like they had like weird factions in Doom. And I think IDL destroyed clans and like brought the competitive Doom community together, and that was great. But I think you're right. Like a lot of us, and No Star is not the only person here, like really internalized that toxic culture and brought that quote unquote competitiveness to IDL.
Right.
And it sort of seemed like in order to be taken seriously, you had to have some element of that. And I think some players relished in that more than others. I I don't I didn't dislike it, but I was more interested in building like a, I don't know, rational or reasonable culture. Because one of the things I really disliked about ZDaemon was the discussions weren't rational.
No.
You couldn't say, "Hey, Kilgore, I just want to, have some remote control over ZDaemon servers. What if we do this?" Or like, "We want some stats. What if we do this?" And like, he just ban you.
Yeah.
I'm like, "Well, that sucks."
Yeah.
Like, stop criticizing us. We work for free. You're banned forever. And you're like, Jesus. And so I wanted, that was one of my key concerns, to have like more of a reasonable administration and have like a more, feel free to say whatever,
Right.
right? Like, we're all equals here. We're all players. This is for us. And I think in order to do that, we had to like entertain a lot of, you can say a diversity of opinion, but it was also diversity of personalities and like a lot of toxicity.
Yeah.
A lot of the ways like we treated each other were super fucked up. A lot of like the ways that we sort of shut people down when like dealing with their issues or something would just be like too much effort, or would be like, or like drive out players we liked, I'm not definitely not proud of. And I think there's definitely an element of like, yeah, like if we had this rule, then we'll lose, white boy. If we had this rule, we'll lose Lord British. If we had this rule, we'll lose, Ty. I guess we'll never lose Ty. He would never not join.
No. You're right. To this day, he still plays,
Yeah.
by the way, in everything.
Right. Bella Beast or Bloodstrike or Caboose or something, Genova. Yeah, and so we were always taking these kinds of things, these political concerns, into consideration. And I think you're right, that definitely hurt, because you could, from an outside perspective, you could tell. And you definitely wouldn't have the kind of political capital needed to like have a good IDL experience unless you were just amazing, but then we just assumed you were a cheater.
Yeah.
and we threw you out. So, yeah, we just, there's too many constraints, largely. We just needed more players. We needed more money. We needed like a port that like would be cool with us. And I think there was just like no winning. But even so, we should have been nicer. It wouldn't have killed us to be a little nicer.
No. And we touched on that earlier with just our age and the biases
Right.
that came with that due to that. Um,
Totally.
and I think the really big thing to keep in mind here is that everything that we're describing right now is the past. And the Doom community has solved many of these things. But some of these things that you're mentioning still exist to this day. Some of the bitterness and the animosities, especially between ZDaemon and literally everything that's not ZDaemon, that
Well,
still
they're not very
exists.
nice people.
Yeah. And that contributed to the formation and the shaping of the IDL. So it's
Yeah.
difficult to blame the IDL for all of this because this was a toxic culture that existed prior to the IDL,
Oh,
and the IDL
yeah.
just inherited it and dealt with it how it could.
And
And
I think the IDL improved it.
yeah,
For
oh
what it's
for
worth.
sure, but it was never going to fix that.
No.
That still exists till this day. It's a
Of course.
lot better. It's a lot more manageable, mostly because we're all in our 30s now, and we have a control and a level of maturity over the community that our predecessors did not.
Yeah.
So we're able to kind of shut some of that really stupid shit down. Um, But even then, it still pops up. It still makes its way into events. Um, and it's just one of those things that I think is probably always going to exist in competition, no matter what it is, whether it's esports, whether it's, you know, real physical sports. You just don't
Sure.
see it because you're not there. But we're a more transparent level because we're a very small community and everyone knows everyone. So it's very difficult for you not to know about it because you see it as it's happening. Um,
Sure. I mean, like if you look at like league machinations for like NBA, right? I mean, I'm sure GMs cuss each other out all the time,
yeah.
right? I'm sure there's lots of trash talk, you know, like Kevin Garnett saying Carmelo Anthony's wife tastes like Honey Nut Cheerios or whatever. Right?
Oh, when he
It's
called Charlie
classic.
Villanueva a cancer patient,
Oh, he walked that back. He said, "I would never make fun of the
he said
brave
that shit.
survivors of
100,
cancerous."
100% said that.
And he said that he was
I think he did.
cancerous to his team in the league. Yeah, he did.
Yeah.
100% he did.
But go on,
But
sorry.
yeah, no, there's an element of that in like any competitive whatever, and I think we should put it like in perspective. But I do think there is like a little bit of, well, I haven't been involved in a really long time, but I think like in order to balance that out, right, you have to like show love to your teammates. You have to
Yeah.
show love to like the people in your community. I think we didn't do a good enough job at that because we're all young men, and young men in America suck at that shit.
Yeah. Well, and it was like we said, it was a product too of we're inheriting the toxic culture that existed from the clan times. And
Totally.
it's so funny that we're talking about this because this was a conversation that also took place in the Human Bones Ralphus podcast where they talked about, yeah, we know the IDL killed clans.
Hmm.
And they almost were like, no, the clans were great, the clans were awesome. And I'm I'm not I don't want to mischaracterize what they were saying. It was more of just a they're speaking back on how it was.
Hmm.
And they weren't giving opinions. But the way that they were speaking, it was almost like, oh no, IDL killed the clans, bad IDL. Clans can never come back. Because Ralph made a very good point. Clans did allow for new players to play.
Yeah.
The IDL didn't. So
Yeah.
I don't want to demonize clans either,
Oh
but
yeah.
there was a toxic culture that existed with that, and it probably wasn't because of clans. It was just because of we're going back to the very beginning roots of ZDaemon and just the toxic ideology that their administration had post Nightfang ownership. And
Yeah.
it's that is such a top down processing model that it they influence the way the community is through their actions and through how they administrate. And the fact of the matter is that yes, there is zero doubt that Doom ideology is incredibly toxic and the conversation is very divisive about should we go this direction, should we go that direction. But the
Hmm.
ZDaemon staff, the way that they chose to handle it, there's multiple ways you can handle it. You can try to be transparent and talk to everybody. You're going to burn yourself out doing that.
Yeah.
You can just ban everybody and say, nope, I don't deal with dissenting opinions. That's what they did.
Right. And
Or
that
you could,
destroys your community.
yeah. Or you could do what the smarter people, you just ignore it. You don't pay attention to it. You don't acknowledge it. You
Yeah.
know, you do take good criticism when you can get it. But again, you don't acknowledge it because you're not trying to start a fire or, well, really, you'd be adding fuel to the flames. That was the Doom community.
Yeah.
And go ahead.
Well, I was just thinking like you have to choose what voices to amplify,
Yeah.
right? And you have to choose like what you say and like what example that you set.
And
And I
they didn't
think
set a good one.
no, definitely not. And like furthermore, like you couldn't act like them, right? You couldn't do the things like Kilgore did, or you couldn't do the same things like Domains did. You just had to be a sycophant,
Yeah.
which is like a who wants to be a part of that community? And the answer is almost no one, right? If you, I haven't looked at numbers in a while, but like my wild guess is that almost no one plays Z-Damon anymore. And people who do are like, ooh, what's this cool old garbage thing? Or they've just been playing it for 20 years,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Like
You're mostly
that's
right.
yeah, and that's really sad. Doom is an incredible, still unique game. There's nothing like it, and they just squandered it. And I hope they like it because that's what they got.
Yeah. So it's interesting that you bring that up too, because this is just more along the lines of what we're already talking about.
Mm.
I absolutely agree, and we've hit this point home already about their attitude driving toxicity in the community. And at the very least, okay, so at the worst, they were responsible. At the least, they didn't make it better, and they had the power to make it better. But
Yeah.
when we talk about it, why we tend to say no, it's more on the worse end, is because you have things that happen where like, um, for people to understand the history of the IDL and the relationship with ZDaemon is Ralphus and I think like Chain Dude and a couple other people founded the IDL, right? And
Yeah.
Ralphus was banned from ZDaemon from an incident that had taken place in the mid 2000s where Ralphus went to id Gaming to just be like, hey, is it legal? Should they be doing this? Should they be allowing Gitwad to find the Doom 2 WAD? And Ralph is, by his own admission, basically said, I was just trying to prove a point. This was never about getting the CIA sent to them, and that never happened, but Kilgore accused that it did happen. Um, and ZDaemon's stance was, no, it's not illegal. Google should fix their search engine. And I'm not here to discuss what is or isn't right. But the fact of the matter is ZDaemon took that as an attack on them, and they forever blacklisted Ralph. And anybody that associated Ralph was immediately blacklisted and banned.
Yeah.
And that is why the IDL had a toxic relationship with ZDaemon, is because they looked at that as Ralph's project, and they probably thought in the back of their mind, well, this is their way of getting back at us, which it fucking wasn't. We just wanted to play competitive Doom.
Yeah, they literally said that they would help us as long as Ralphus quit
Yeah.
and wasn't a part of the IDL anymore.
Which is ridiculous.
Like, yeah, they were like, yeah, it's like this weird, like when Rome would conquer a city, whatever. They'd be like, yeah, they just kill your leader and then like let you be whatever you want as long as you kill your leader. And you're like, well, fuck you.
Yeah.
I like him. I don't like you. So you can eat shit.
Yeah, and that might sound on the surface like, well, why don't you just take that deal? You guys could have gone forward. Because the problem is there's no law, there's no precedent set there, and where do you draw the line? What happens if the next person comes along and they don't like that person? Like, it would just have, what it would have eventually become is it would have been another thing that was controlled by ZDaemon, and they would have run it into the ground because ZDaemon never cared about competitive Doom. And the competitive base had its problems, to be sure, but you don't egg them on and you don't provoke them and antagonize them the way that ZDaemon did. And I will use this as a perfect example of how I knew that they would antagonize. They would send people on their staff to idle in the IDL chat, take the logs from the IDL IRC chat, and give them back to the ZDaemon administration. Yeah. Why the fuck do you care what we're saying in the IDL chat? And that's because that's what they want to do. They want to have control over it, but they were mad because they couldn't have control over it. And that is the type of thing that fractures a community. And that existed 100% because of them. And so when we have that conversation, that's what we're talking about, right?
And I think super importantly, like what a lot of people liked about IDL is you could just speak your mind, right? You could be like, ZDaemon does this and it sucks, or like Ladna plays this way and he's an asshole, and like we wouldn't ban you, like No Star might, but Ladna wouldn't,
right?
Ralphus wouldn't, right? Like you could still play. We wouldn't like, fuck your team or whatever. It would still be you could still compete. You could still be part of the community. We might, call you names in return, but it was equal, right? We were never going to Kilgore you or ban you, unless you were like harassing people. There were just a couple instances where like, knock guy out of hand or something, but
right.
But yeah, for the most part, it was like we just wanted to play with our friends. We just wanted to play competitive Doom with our friends, and Ralphus was our friend.
Yeah.
And that's sort of the end of it. And ZDaemon was like, no, we want you to play our way. And we're like, well, we don't care what you think at all. So, haha.
Yeah, and that was ultimately what drove to years later the IDL moving away from ZDaemon. But we had a proven commodity with ZDaemon. That's the thing. All things considered, at the time, ZDaemon was a very good port. And
best competitive Doom port.
And it's because I'm sure somebody listening to this would be thinking, well, why don't you just leave ZDaemon? We didn't really have any other options. I mean, Skulltag at the time was decent, but there were a lot of problems with Skulltag. Odamex was still being developed, but Odamex wasn't anywhere near ready. So we were stuck with them. And that's the type of relationship we had. And I know I remember talking with Rust about this. There was one example where you had put in a request for some sort of change. I don't even remember what it was, and it was on the forums, and you could still find it to this day. And basically, Kilgore said, "I'll ban you instead."
Yeah. I was like, great, thanks. I think I was still like trying to be reasonable or something too. I was like very like, okay, this is weird, but maybe I can fix it.
Yeah.
No, it was just bonkers. They're just bonkers humans.
Yeah, no kidding. So
It's too bad.
let's talk about coding for a little bit, because there's so
Sure.
much of it that I don't understand. And you know what? I'm gonna be frank. A lot of people listen to this stuff, and it's often talked about like everybody understands. And there's a lot of people that just simply don't. I was never a coder. I don't know the nuances of coding and what comes along with it. So explain to
Sure.
me. So there's number one, for people to understand. Is it there like two different kind of like coding rules or laws or whatever that exist within Doom? One has to be open source, but like one has to be closed source by law. Like it's a really weird thing. You know more
uh,
about this because you have experience doing it. So I'm going to let you explain it, and I'm going to quit butchering
yeah.
it.
No. It is, in fairness, super complicated. I'm going to try to make it as simple as possible. In the beginning, Carmack, God bless him, created the Doom community when he and its software released Doom as open source. They published it totally open. There's some like weird history in it, but like, yeah, here's Doom, Doom 2, have at it. That was released initially Christmas 1999, I think, under the Doom source license, which tragically allowed people to close the source. You can release a binary without releasing source. It was later re-released under the GNU GPL, the General Public License, or GNU Public License. I don't. It's recursive in a weird way. In a GPL, and that means if you make modifications to the source code and make a new binary, you must release the source code. And so different ports trace their history to different versions of that initial Doom source release. ZDoom traces itself to DOS Doom, which was released under or inherited from the initial Doom source license. Other ports like Chocolate Doom or Eternity Engine or what have you trace themselves to the GPL source. Importantly, they are identical. They're just different licenses, so you can frankly just choose whichever one. And so that meant that ZDaemon and Skulltag and ZDoom, although ZDoom has always been open source, could conceivably release binaries, like just release like the ZDaemon game, without releasing the ZDaemon source code. And they could say, well, we don't have to comply with GPL because this is a Doom source license derivative. This is at best ignorant, but it is, at this point, it's a lie. They know that they had to comply with the GPL because they have Quake source code. A lot of the ZDaemon netcode is from CS Doom, which uses netcode from Quake, the Quake client server stuff. It also uses vector map from Quake 2. Literally in the vectors.cpp source file, it says taken from Q2, Randy. Like, Quake 2 is always GPL. And so, like, at least ZDaemon 106 is GPL, like it's in violation. And it's not like they rewrote everything, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, there's no way that ZDaemon is legal at all. It's a complete lie. And they know it, because I told them.
So 107 is where they claim to have removed that code, and
Correct.
they are now in compliance with that law, and therefore they are closed source, and they will not release it. Which means, and there's to be, so everybody can understand this, and this, that you don't have to be a coder to understand this. There are advantages and disadvantages to having open and closed source.
Sure.
The advantages to closed source is that theoretically nobody should be able to create effective cheats or effective hacks, but people do.
Mm-hmm.
And that you have control over your code, and that you don't have to worry about it being broken off into some other random game and your community taken away from you.
Right.
The disadvantages, however, are that it is not transparent. What you are doing is unknown to other people. So that, like, for example, someone like you who says, hey ZDaemon, we have a competitive league, the IDL. We want stats for our game. If you could just let me take a look at your code, I can actually build this into the engine itself and into the game itself, and we could do this and have it be a part of ZDaemon, the ZDaemon experience, as opposed to having to use a forum program and finding a way to make that work, which would be a lot more work for me and would be less effective overall.
Yeah.
And ZDaemon said, no, fuck you. Go fuck yourself. You're banned.
Also, the Doom source license has a non-commercial use clause. So if we say wanted to run IDL and have like a prize, or if we wanted to run ads, or have like a sponsorship, out of the question. Can't do it with ZDaemon or Zandronum or Skulltide.
I did not know that, but well,
yeah,
we did have they did have a cash prize in 2015. I might be indicting some people, but
there are various violations that I won't name. But yeah, it's little known, but it's a problem.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm sure to be fair, because the community is so small, because Doom is so old. And quite frankly, the culture of Doom, regardless of which license you use, is that we know we borrow from other shit. Doom's lifeblood, I have always said, is in modding. Because Doom has been modded so much that there are versions of modded Doom now that, like, you could say that's not even Doom. Like, there's Mega Man Doom. There's people
I love the Mega Man Doom.
There's people who make, like, straight up, like, RPG games of Doom. There's all these different modified versions of Doom, and everybody knows about, like, you could get Doom to run on anything, right?
I mean, Captain the Flag. That's a mod.
Yeah. So, while these are true laws and violations, the reality is nobody's going to come looking for you if you've done this or participated in this. But if it did get to a certain level where maybe ownership of something came into question, maybe the legality of something that was really serious, like a matter of ownership, or maybe serious competition prizes, like serious money,
right?
Then you might have a different story. But a couple of 50 players competing for $1,000 here, nobody's going to bat an eye to that. But still, if you're trying to take the stance like Kilgore did, that they were trying to get me in trouble, they were trying to get me put in jail, it's like, well, technically you are breaking the law. Like, that is unquestionable. You are violating, I guess,
he wrote
rules
a program explicitly to find IWADs.
Yeah.
Like let's just not beat around the bush. He wanted more people to play ZDaemon, and so in GitWad he made it download IWADs. Case closed. Yeah. And then when Ralph was like, "That's copyright infringement," and Kilgore was like, "Well, it's just Google." Like, it's no different than me going to Google and typing in doom2.wad and finding like some FTP site, right?
And so, go ahead.
No, that's the whole game. He's like, well, Google should fix their thing, but like, it's not Google should fix their thing. It's that you shouldn't be using Google that way. It's like stealing someone's bike because they don't lock it up. It's like you're saying, well, someone should lock it up, but you stole it. you wrote the program that stole it.
Right.
And it'd be so easy to just be like, if name equals doom2.wad, don't download. Easy. Done. But that guy's an idiot. And again, it's because he wants more people to play ZDaemon, which ironically had the opposite effect.
Yeah, and it's funny too because it's like that type of gaslighting. That wasn't just with that; it was everything. Right. Yeah. Everything ZDaemon related. Well, it's like it would be. I'm not going to say a tedious technicality. It is gaslighting. It's 100% like. Well, this isn't my fault. It's this, but it's not that. No, it's this. You need to look at that.
It's like textbook. Yeah.
And it's like you hide behind jargon, you hide behind obscurity, you hide behind lack of clarity, but but yet we objectively know what you're doing, and you do too.
Yeah.
And so that's why when we talk about the competitive history of Doom, when we talk about the IDL, when we talk about, frankly, ZDaemon, this you cannot ignore.
It's inescapable.
This is the reason why the community was what it was. There are other factors, to be sure, but as far as the development of the port, the development and the maintenance of the leagues that were associated with it, this is why they took the directions they took. And this is why ultimately every major league that was ever associated with ZDaemon picked up and left because they would all run into the same thing. Eventually, Kilgore or the ZDaemon administration wanted some sort of control over it, and the administrators and the owners of the league said no. And they didn't like that. So in the case of the IDL, for example, and now we're circa 2012, they told the IDL administration, because 1.09 at the time we were on 1.08.03 or something like that, we were on the verge of getting the famous 1.09 that was going to solve everything and was actually like a dud.
It's kind of a dud, yeah.
They told specifically the IDL staff, we are not going to release the server binaries to you.
Yeah.
And we didn't know when 1.09 was going to drop. So the IDL staff was met with the very difficult decision. Do we continue on ZDaemon, a known entity, a known commodity? We know what works. We have something that works right now. But in the middle of a league, they could release a new version, and the only way to continue playing in this league is you'd have to have the old version of ZDaemon and connect to unadvertised server. Or do we just pick up and go now? And they made a decision, the IDL board at the time made the decision, and there's a lot of political stuff. There's a lot of people that accuse it of being what Ralph ultimately always wanted to do, and that was to get the IDL on Odamex and have Odamex control it, which there's truth to that.
Sure. It was the right call.
Yeah. But that's why. And the problem with that was, though, is Odamex wasn't ready.
Yeah.
And a lot of players left because they weren't willing to transition to a new port that had a lot of problems. We had stability for all the problems in the world that came along with ZDaemon and their staff. As players, minus the politics, as players, we had stability.
They had a bunch of problems, right? Like, its netcode was basically trash. It would crash just for no reason a lot. You'd have all kinds of like packet loss problems. But we had been using it for years.
We knew what to expect.
Right. And I think importantly, players were good on ZDaemon. Like, all that stuff, all the hierarchies had hashed out.
Yeah.
And so, like, it's very possible you were great on ZDaemon and really bad on Odamex. Or vice versa. You'd be like okay on Odamex, but somebody who was terrible, like, I don't know, Legion is my go-to example of this, would like just crush you. And you're like, I don't lose to Legion. Odamex is garbage. I'm out. Yeah. Right? And like that, I mean, there's like, a lot of toxicity and stuff that happens there. But I mean, you can't expect like that competitive environment to just stay wholly intact while all those power dynamics shift. Like, that was just, it was going to be a rocky transition no matter what.
Right. And it was, but I agree. I think it was the right call. And I think hindsight is 2020. I think they could have afforded to wait another season. And it would have afforded them more time to test the port. Because the problem is, and very little people know this, is when we moved from IDL from the winter 2012 season, which was the last season on ZDaemon, to summer 2012. We were doing a lot of playtesting on Odamex at the same time. And that version of Odamex was actually pretty good. The netcode was really stable. Yeah. The game didn't crash. The problem is it didn't even support slopes. Like, it literally, you couldn't have slopes. And how could you do that? Like, half the maps. Yeah, half the maps. And
map 8,
had slopes. Like, that wasn't, like, we weren't going to go and like modify all the maps to like,
the physics aren't the same.
Ghetto rig slopes up, right? Like, that's not what we were going to do. So they, as quickly as they could, released a version that did support that, and it had 1,000,001 problems. Like, I told a story with I forget who I told it with on a podcast, but basically, in 2012, winter 2012, I won the IDL championship, the Master Bowl, and summer 2012, I actually had a very fucking good team on paper. I had me, Shackle, and Collision. And that, if it would have been on ZDaemon, if we would have stayed on ZDaemon, I'm convinced I could have repeated. But on Odamex, when I drafted both of them, they were kind of, I talked both of them into signing up for the IDL. But they said,
classic.
Like, hey, if you draft us, just know that if we hate Odamex, we're not playing. Kind of like what you said earlier about the Legion example.
Yeah.
And I remember as we were practicing, we were like, holy shit, like, it feels okay, but then weird shit happens. Yeah. And we were playing against KGB. We were playing against Ty's team. And I remember Vadim, who was Shackle, was trying to shoot a rocket down a hallway and return to Phobos. And the rocket randomly just went straight to the sky. And he just starts fucking laughing like, I'm not playing this shit anymore. And it was just stuff like this, like all over the place that it just didn't work. It wasn't ready. And as a result, sadly, there were a lot of players that left the IDL community and like villainized Ralphus for that. But they don't know the full story. Like, they don't realize that really moving to Odamex had to happen.
Yeah.
And without getting into the politics of Odamex and stuff, in the long run, whether you like Ralphus or not, it can, in my mind, and this is truly my opinion, but I objectively think Ralphus is better for the Doom community than Kilgore.
Oh, who doesn't like Ralphus?
Well, there's people who don't.
Show themselves.
And they're people... And they're people that, even if they might not necessarily dislike him, they think he's pretty much just trying to shove Odamex down our throat. But I'm just kind of like, but isn't that what a Doom port is supposed? Isn't that what you're supposed to do with the product? Aren't you supposed to say, I want you to play this. Let me convince you to play it.
Yeah, like, man. I mean, I agree, like, probably should like the Odamex bake a little bit more. But all that said, like, the situation with ZDaemon was untenable, right? It was never going to be... Idea was never going to grow on ZDaemon. And like he was saying, like, you know, getting new players or, like, building more, like, you know, building richer experiences was never going to happen on ZDaemon. And so, you know, if you know Ralphus, Ralphus jumps into stuff, right? And so, like, he loves the Eagles, you know?
Yeah.
He loves Doom. He loves Unidoom. He loves Odamex. He loves Capture the Flag. And, like, if you're expecting Ralphus to like something and not, you know, tell you how awesome it is all the time, you don't know the guy.
Right.
Like, you're an idiot.
And go ahead.
Well, I mean, at this point, like, Odamex is a better competitive port than ZDaemon. I mean, unless, like, 110 or 11 or whatever is, like, fixed all the dumbness in 109. But 109 wasn't playable. It felt like Skull Tag. We were just like, no, we're not doing this.
Yeah, and it wasn't going to be something that was ever going to work. And there's a lot of stuff that happened in the Odamex time. Frankly, I wasn't around for it, so I don't know.
There's politics there too. Like a lot of Odamex people are like old school people that don't want to like implement like new school features and stuff like that. So there's politics there too.
There absolutely are, and they have definitely changed a little bit on that. And I want to be as unbiased as I can. I currently love the Odamex staff. Right now, the Odamex staff, the development team, I think consists of Dr. Sean, Hobo Master came back and he's been working on their code. Alex Max came back and he's been working. Chow. There might be some people I'm missing, but I think that's the gist of it. But they're all like, you know what? They're very receptive to change. They're very receptive to feedback. And if you say, as I've been testing, as anybody has been testing, like, for example, in this new version of Odamex that they're putting out, I keep on having sound issues where, like, the game sounds really muffled. They went out of their way to contact me to test, like, all of these tedious things. It was annoying to me. It took, like, an hour to test, like, all of these things to try and figure out what was... And I'm, like, the only person having this problem. Like, they could have easily just said, it's one person, who gives a shit. In fact, that's the economic thing to do.
Sure, yeah.
But no, they said, no, we value your input. We want to get this issue fixed for you.
I mean, you're a VIP. Yeah, you gotta...
Well, I mean...
gotta make Hey Daddy happy.
I mean, I don't know about that, but...
I do.
But it's just, the point is, you know...
No, yeah, they're good guys.
Yeah, like, theoretically, you could do that with anybody, and you should say, like, who cares? It's one person.
Yeah.
And it... Most likely, what I've determined is it's an issue with my PC, and there's things I've got to adjust. But, I mean, the fact of the matter is they still took the time out of their day to do that. I mean, ZDaemon would have never done. I would have never gotten that from ZDaemon.
Legitimately take the meanest Dr. Sean post. I don't even know what that would be because he's incredibly nice. And then take the nicest Kilgore post, and I guarantee you Kilgore looks like the Grinch next to Dr. Sean. Like, it's just night and day. Those personalities. Like, Dr. Sean is a human being.
Yeah.
Right? Kilgore is like a moldy sponge. It's just, Yeah, seriously, like who do you want to
He
like
smells
deal
of
with
shit.
at all? Yeah, yeah, it's like you think something's died.
Yeah.
I don't know Master that well. Alex Max is like a pillar of the Doom community. Like, has been around for forever.
Right.
Like, also good guy, super dedicated. Like, yeah, I mean, good crew.
Yeah. So, and again, you hit the nail on the head. There's biases there too. They're not perfect. They're human. But
Yeah,
they're just much more reasonable.
right.
And they've
Yeah,
definitely you know what? I've talked to Alex. So like most of the mapping that I do now, for example, I prefer to map with Zandronum stuff. I don't like mapping for a lot of vanilla stuff.
it's
Um
way too restrictive.
exactly.
Yeah,
And I ultimately want to do a single player project, which is more GZ Doom based, right? So,
yeah,
but I would love to do that and have it be supported at the minimum on something like Odamex. So like 3D floors, PK3 support, UDMF support, and stuff like that. But I
oh yeah.
realize we're a long way away from that. Odamex can't even do skyboxes right now. And I'm not shitting on them because their drive right now is to do what's best for the competitive community. And the competitive experience dictates that you have a mostly vanilla experience with some of the newer Z Doom features like jumping, free look, maybe platforming can improve a little bit, which it's so holy shit, the platforming on Odamex is so much better than what it is on ZDaemon. And
Really?
oh yeah, like some of the jumps are just you're not ZDaemon ZDaemon handles movement in a really fucked way. So like the higher your ping is with ZDaemon, and when and it could be moderately high, like maybe 80 to 90. You don't even have to go that high. You could talk about something like maybe a 60 or 70 ms ping. Your movement just feels fucked. Like
Oh,
you
that's
feel
true.
like you don't
Yeah,
have like actual, but in Odamex that's not the case. So like that affects things even down to simple platforming, jumping from one platform to another.
totally. Yeah,
The mouse code is so much better in this version. Um,
nice.
there's just so much that's got going for it. And I'm sure when they release it, there's going to be bugs. There's going to be issues. But you want to know what? They're going to be like, well, just talk to us. And again, I am not saying that there probably have not. There definitely have been times where they might be snippy, where they might be like, yeah, fuck off, or who cares, or whatever. But you know what? They're not banning you for it.
Right.
They're
Well, they
not
can't.
getting rid of you, right?
Yeah, the whole that'd be completely antithetical to the whole like Odamex and IDL like crew. Like, we don't even like, if you run a server, yeah, you can have a ban list that's your server, but it's not going to be you enforcing Dr. Sean's ban list, right?
Yeah,
Otherwise, they don't give you the server binary. That's like tyrannical and weird.
yeah. And it's too. It's like Odamex has the misfortune of not really getting their port ready into the mid 2010s.
Yeah,
Unfortunately, they were 10 years too late. So, Zandronum still gets new players.
because of all the
Z-Daemon,
mods.
Z-Daemon every now and again will still get some new players, and they still have, like you said, some dedicated players. Odamex practically doesn't get new players. People find out about Odamex through coming in through Z-Daemon or Zandronum. And then they learn, oh man, Odamex is so much better, but let's go there. Odamex has done everything it can to advertise itself, put itself out there, but it's competing against a fractured history that it just doesn't have a chance against.
Well, let's be real. Like, how many Zandronum players plus ZDaemon players plus Odamex players are there? Like, what, 200 maybe?
Zandronum.
Like,
Oh, for Zandronum, there's probably way more.
oh, really?
Yeah, but like keep in mind, like Zandronum's at a point where they're running Mega Man stuff, Brutal Doom stuff, like all of these different mods that can't be supported at all on
Right.
Odamex or
Yeah.
ZDaemon, right? So these are players that you likely aren't ever going to get on Odamex or ZDaemon anyway.
Yeah.
But you have
Yeah,
to
you
try.
can't.
You have to try because they're the only things multiplayer Doom is getting. And that's the goal of the MDF. Now, the MDF is not the goal is not to funnel players into Odamex. The goal of the MDF is to say, "Hey guys, there's other ports, try them out, maybe you'll like them." And
Yeah.
we have gotten a couple of new players that way. There's some pretty decent new up and coming players that are like, "Yo, holy shit, like you're really good." And yeah, so our model now, I guess, and the IDL is no longer the IDL. It became the WDL, the World Doom League, in 2015. I guess you probably wouldn't have known that.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of drama in politics, and there's reasons for that, which have been told on another podcast. So I'm not going to beat the dead horse, but the WDL now functions on the Odamex player base. So basically, Odamex is not really active unless there's QuakeCon, some sort of tournament going on that Jahar's running, which is really cool. I'll tell you about it. Or WDL, or MDF, or any MDF event.
Yeah.
So what that means is that if those things aren't happening, Odamex is practically a dead port.
Right.
So that means that their staff realizes they can't be that way towards people. They can't ban people, like you said. They don't have a choice. Like, if they get people, they have to keep them. But that doesn't mean that Odamex doesn't work. It just means that Odamex is basically filling the competitive niche of Doom that was left void when ZDaemon decided to say, we're going to kill ourselves and everyone around us.
Well, they're the port that listened to competitive players, right? When like IDL said, hey, Zandronum, we're thinking about using your port, they were like, cool, we hope you like ZDoom 2 physics. You can't possibly change them. You know, like, cool, we hope you like the busted SSG. You can't possibly change it. I'm like, but we want you to change it.
Yeah.
Would you maybe look into changing it or whatever? Or like something like with ZDaemon, right? Like, we already rehashed all that, and Odamex was, you know, it was bumpy. But eventually Dr. Sean just kind of like did it.
Yeah.
And everything was fine. And yeah, like, it's no surprise, like, you listen to a community and then that community uses your software. That's the story of literally every software product that is currently in use. Right?
Sure. Yeah, for sure.
That's how you get users of your stuff. You listen to what they want. It's just so basic. And I think that obviously bears out. And I think, to Zandronum's credit, like, they're not super chasing the competitive community. They're chasing like the mapping and modding community, and that's why you get like baller ass Zandronum mods that I think are amazing. But like, they're not competitive, right? You're not going to play like Brutal Doom on.
There's other stuff. There's other stuff now that we've worked on. But yeah, I mean, you are, for the most part, you're absolutely right, and I agree with you for the most part. It's just that the competitive history of Doom comes from more vanilla Doom-like settings. And
Right.
yes, we use modifications. And yes, we are not playing Doom2.exe when we play Odamex CTF. But
yeah, it's very new school.
there is this subjective idea in where you draw the line and what is and isn't Doom. It has to feel like Doom. And it is arguable that Zandronum, after a certain point, takes the game so far away that it looks like Doom, but it doesn't really feel like it. And
They rewrote the physics engine. It's not the same at all. Yeah.
I don't know where I stand on that, because I think it depends on how you define Doom. And for me, at this point, I define Doom as like the ongoing mod of Doom. So like, it's just constant modification. Like, that's the culture of Doom.
Mm-hmm.
Therefore, Vanilla Doom is the same as the most recent version of GZ Doom in that sense. It's just an ongoing modification of the original project. So everything all encompassing is Doom, but maybe what we should say is it's Doom, but it's still different. And there's nothing wrong with that. But the problem is if you say it's not Doom, there's immediate stigma that comes with that. And that type of language becomes more divisive than anything. So I'll give you an example. The Rust, and I know you remember Rust, but
oh yeah, good guy.
They started back in the early to mid 2000s a project called Progressive Duel, and it was based off of Aeon and Neon and all of these different game-changing physics that changed armor values, that added new weapons in because they have decorate support, so they're not constricted to the allotted frames. They can surpass. They can have as many frames as they want. They can have as many things as they want. And yes, it uses Doom 2, but it adds new things into the game. So like, for example, Rust coded out wall running. Like, you can't wall run in Progressive Duel.
Did you like mod a port? Is that what you're saying?
No, it's a WAD. It's a WAD. Like,
it's like for Zandronum.
So yeah, Zandronum. Yeah, God no, it would never be supported by ZDaemon or Odamex.
Yeah. Okay, I'm caught up.
Yeah. So they use 3D floors. We have custom weapons, custom armors, custom armor values, new armor calculations. all of these things, right? And their idea of it was built on this idea of in 2012 when they had the first Doom 2 QuakeCon event, one of the complaints that was just ever present in the comment section was when they were watching J-Kiss and Dev play, it was like, my God, they're just using the super shotgun on each other. And that's it. There's no other. And it's true. The super shotgun is objectively overpowered. It just drowns out all the other weapons. And that's not this. Well,
we can come back to it. Yeah.
Let me clarify that.
Yeah.
It has the tendency to drown out other weapons. It doesn't always.
No, it does. Yeah, you're right. I agree with you there.
It's just that it depends on the map. It depends on a lot of different things. But typically, that's what it does. Prague's approach is, and Prague is short for Progressive Duel, is we want to get away from that. Like, we recognize that the super shotgun is really good. We're not going to change it. We're going to change all the other weapons, and we're going to add new weapons into the game. So, of course, you're going to get people that, well, that's not Doom. And on some level, like, that is offensive to us because, like, yes, it is. We're using the same, you know what I mean? Like, we're using the same base game that you are. We just took it a little further because we're trying to fix the problems. And in the end, isn't that what modifications are supposed to do, is fix the problems of something or enhance them or enhance the features? So if I'm defining Doom, going back to my very beginning point, if I'm defining Doom as the ongoing process of modification, then I think that this version, Progressive Duel, is still Doom. It's just a different flavor of Doom. So that's why I'm hesitant to say that Zandronum isn't competitively viable. I think it is. They have competitive leagues that work on them. There's a lot of political stuff I'm not going to get into about it. But I do generally, I agree. Odamex is the competitive port, and that's its niche, and that was left behind because of ZDaemon. That's the only point I wanted to make.
No, and I definitely agree with you. I think the point of mods, I would extend what you said. I wouldn't say that it's just to fix stuff. I think it's to explore different things. Like, I think because of the weapon balance in Doom 2, all the maps, not all of them, almost all the maps, are built for SSG supremacy. D5, Durango 5, right? Map 1, like, there's just SSGs everywhere. Like, yeah, you can get a plasma. Yeah, there's a BFG or whatever, but, like, you spawn with an SSG.
Yeah.
Like, that's that map. And lots of dual maps are the same. Like, and it's super weird to have a map where you don't spawn with an SSG, especially in CTF. Like, that sort of defines the map in lots of ways. Like, if you're on defense, can you chase? Like, what routes can you take as a runner? Can you afford to not get an SSG? Like, Genoa's famous, like, map 17 performance, where he just didn't get weapons, right? Because, like, getting the SSG was just so out of the way. Those things define those maps. And I think, like, the weapon balance, mappers react to that, and then players react to those maps, and it just sort of becomes this cycle.
Yeah.
And I think if you change that balance, like, Prague Doom is trying to do, that's a different way of looking at it. And I think, like, if you come from, like, a Quake world or, like, a Unreal Tournament world where, like, all the weapons are kind of viable or at least different, that's because those weapons started out different, and those maps are built for, like, a variety of weapons in the way that Dooms weren't. And so you look at that, and from that perspective, you're like, oh, this is just boring. It's like an old map and only one weapon is good. But one, that's not really true. Like, there's different examples, especially in Capture the Flag, but, like, Plasma's dominant, right? Or, like, running with the BFG is dominant. You have to be careful, like, when putting that weapon in the map. But if you don't have that perspective, yeah, it is going to look boring. Or, like, just watching people play, like, Durango 5 map 1 for, like, how long do those maps take? Like 40 minutes or something?
Yeah, they can. In a very competitive game, yes.
Right, and, like, Quake, like, plays to 10 minutes and, like, half the game is hiding, which is super infuriating to me. I was like, this game is for wusses. You literally have to get good at hiding to play it, or we're teaching our children.
Right.
But, like, yeah, Doom is just straight, like, you murder as much as you can, And so, yeah, I think it's a lot of perspective, and I do think, like, you're right, the strength of mods is you have a different perspective on things. You grow the definition of it. And I think I use the word grow specifically because there are a lot of things that you can't replicate in Zandronum or, like, ZDaemon 2 right now. They're, like, were core parts of the game. They just, like, they consider them bugs, and so you can't do them anymore because, like, they fixed the the physics glitches or whatever, and like they didn't fix the physics glitches, they rewrote the physics engine, and it didn't reproduce the bugs. Or, like they didn't reproduce the behavior precisely, and so they can't like add hacks or something, or like they just don't want to. And that's fine, right? But like a lot of like Doom 2 map 1 is plasma bump.
Right.
Right? That's a physics bug. Or like grabbing the BFG through the grate. That's physics, right? And like if you rewrite the engine or like wall running, all this stuff, right? These are core parts of like deathmatch. And there's like core things and like when we had the Zandronum season, and what's that map where like you can jump across a huge chasm from the middle like elevator thing right into the flag room that's in a pit. I don't know the number of it anymore. But
are you talking about was it the Master Bowl map that was played in, I want to say, Ralph's No Star Fastidious against Human Bones team?
That sounds right.
I think it was Old 31.
Oh, maybe.
It's all gray. It's all like gray and
it's sewage and shit. It's a bunch of sewage. It's green.
It's green.
The flag is in a pit. You can get to it from 2 stairways on the side. You can just jump in the pit. There's a green armor ahead of the flag, like opposite of it. And the thing about the physics is in ZDaemon, you can jump out of the center like area into the round area, then into the flag room, but you can't jump back. But in Zandronum, you can.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, I don't know what map you're talking about, but your point is well taken. I can offer another point, like in map 8, which is a well-known map, something epic.
Mm-hmm.
And ZDaemon, those slopes that are built to in the base and outside of the base to prevent you from climbing up. In ZDaemon, you can't climb up those. You can't jump on those. On Odamex, you can jump on them, but you'll stay where you are. And Zandronum, you can jump up on those and climb up on them.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
That doesn't break it at all. Yeah.
Yeah, and exactly, but the map was never intended for that. And you're exactly right. Like modifications change that, so it's all relative anyway. But still, saying this is or isn't Doom it's not even an argument in my mind. It's not saying anything.
Well, you can take it from both ends. Like map 8, like you remember like No Star's teams just like being unbeatable on those maps, and like map 8 really became a grind because it's so easy to defend. You have to have like a really agile runner to know all the tricks, and then like a really good team to back them up once they grab. Maybe map 8 is fixed by being able to get in there much more easily.
Well, go ahead.
But like to your point, like it's not better or worse. It's just different. You can imagine like if that one like you can jump back into it now thing, maybe that makes it way less of a grind and actually fun and good to play in a map. Like again, it's not bad or good. It's just different.
Yeah. So things change too, and I think generally this is true. But I would say in your example, one of the things that we're not necessarily privy to, I am now that I've played in leagues recently, strategies have changed. Like, people don't sit on defense and grind anymore because, and this was changing even when IDO was leaving ZDaemon, but like map 8 now is not seen as a grindy defensive map. Everybody is so good at rocket jumping and doing all the tricks and the exploits. Like, people have gotten to a point, and it doesn't matter which engine you use, where they can rocket jump out of map 8 and only burn 8 health.
Oh, nice.
Like, it's insane what people can do now. Strategy in Capture the Flag has changed a lot to be more aggressive offensively. And this is probably a product of technology, in that when we started playing in the IDL, not everybody was playing on voice because you probably didn't have access to a microphone. And if you did, the only programs that existed were like TeamSpeak, which were very taxing. Not Discord, Ventrilo, which was really shitty.
Yeah.
And you needed to own a Ventrilo server. You needed to pay money for it. You needed service for these. Now, with things like Discord, where you can get on voice 100% free, and you could play with comms 100% free, and mics are super cheap now. Every headset that you get now is basically going to include a mic.
Yeah.
The game is just different because communication is better. So people there's not a lot of wasted time just sitting on top of the flag. There are some maps that dictate that. Like, it just doesn't matter what you do, you can't leave the flag. But a lot of the maps where we had this idea of, like, for example, a map 8 where you had a guy on top playing defense the whole time.
Right.
Yeah. Now you'll still see some of that, but they'll, as soon as it's clear, they move out to mid. And they try to put, and there's just that constant rotation and back and forth. This, like I said, was already starting to change towards the end of 2000, even 2010, 2011, 2012. Ralphus's teams always did this. They just practiced a ton and never had a lot of voice communication. But it's just gotten a lot better over time now. So the maps do change as things go on. But it's usually what I'm talking about, the change that I'm talking about is CTF was a newer game mode anyway compared to dueling with your example. Yeah. And there's the things that influenced CTF play that are outside of the game's control, which is technology and communication. There's not really going to be any sort of change that's going to be implemented from an outside source like communication or technology that's going to vastly affect Doom ever again. That was probably the last remaining thing, was how people communicated.
Which is huge.
Yeah,
but you're right.
Exactly.
That's probably it.
There's not going to be really any, like, even if you get mouses that are just way more precise now, like, it won't matter. It's not going to change anything in Doom. If you get a keyboard that's more responsive, if you get a computer, giving your computer more power won't change anything. Like, Doom can run on a fucking stick of glue. Like, it doesn't matter what you do technology-wise. There's nothing that's going to change from an outside source. So your example is right. I wasn't trying to contradict you. I just wanted to point out there are some examples where strategy does still evolve independent of the port.
Definitely.
But for the most part, port does influence strategy on already well understood maps like Doom 2 Map 1. Dwango 5 Map 1, that have a lot of history of play. Like, Doom 2 Map 1 now, I don't know, I wouldn't say it's considered unplayable, but because the plasma bump is so different on all the new versions of the ports, nobody plays it because it just doesn't work the way it used to. So it's not as reliable. Right. And that changes the dynamics of the map.
I mean, all the players I know that are good at Doom 2 Map 1 have a bind for the plasma bump.
You did have to have one.
And the way that a port has the quote-unquote right physics is your bind works.
Exactly.
Well, one, your bind has to be, like, transferable to that port or whatever. There's a whole debate about binds and advanced binds and whatever. But yeah, then you, like, do the demo or whatever and see if that works. If it works, then your physics are right. If it doesn't work, then your port's busted and unplayable.
Yeah, 100%. And we're talking here, and I think it's important for people to understand that, like, even though we've kind of been all over the place, we have talked about a lot of different topics kind of all at once. Like, we've talked about, your experience as a player. We've talked about coding for the IDL, your coding in general. We've talked about conflicts with ZDaemon staff. We've talked even about the end of the ZDaemon era. I want to touch a little bit more on ZD Hook, not ZD Hook. You did not make ZD Hook. No, you made ZD Stack.
I did, yeah.
Can you talk to me about what that process was like? And you don't have to go into the minutia, but just a general overview, because I think it's one of the most important programs ever done for competitive Doom 2, because it gave us effectively at the time live stats, about as well as it was going to, given the limitations that we've already laid out with the ZDaemon staff.
Yeah, so Nostar and I became server admins. Oh man, 2006. We were server admins before we were involved with the IDL.
Right.
We started like Total Trash and did this stuff. We started in St. Louis because they were very cheap and kind of like centrally located. And then we moved to Chicago. I think we had one somewhere else, maybe California or something. I don't know. It's been a long time. And you have essentially like one server or a VPS if you're cheap, and you run multiple like Z servers on it. So you can have like 12 capture the flag servers on a single server, which is what you want to do, because servers are expensive, but also managing all the servers is a big pain in the ass.
Sure.
Like they each have their own ban list, but you don't want them to have their own individual ban list, right? You want them to all share the same one. You have different like settings files. You might like one might get into a bad state. You have to like reboot it, whatever, right? All kinds of different like server admin stuff. Man, what was that set? Odamex. Odamex had a really cool system where like you could set up a server. They had like a PHP like front end or whatever, and then I got a Czech Republic, and you could run up a server that way. And we thought that was super cool. And like we were like looking at doing that for ZD Stack, but initially it was just like server management, and then we started getting into like some more like web pages and stuff. So like we could analyze. So the servers that put a log, and like it's everything from like someone connected or joins the game or switches a team or frags somebody or falls into the lava. And so you can process that log and put like real-time stats. And so we actually had for our local like total trash servers like current stats for games that you can like look at our total trash.org website, which is currently defunct, but it's going to come back once I get all my digital life together. And yeah, you could see like who's like leading in frags and stuff like that without ever having to like join a game. And then we got involved in IDL. And we just sort of like talked about bringing that stuff to IDL, and that took on more of like a analyzing demos, analyzing logs from that stuff, because IDL was very concerned with cheating.
Yeah.
I mean, like the community generally was really concerned with cheating because it was pretty bad, despite being closed source. That didn't work super well. So we had like a demo requirement. So if you ever played an IDL game, you had to upload a demo. You didn't, we time you out for a game, like, I don't know, 2 minutes or something like that. And like if you didn't do it again, we'd make you lose a whole game, or I don't know. I forget what the escalation was, but there were penalties. And so we had a whole system like you could upload stuff. And one, that had to be really bulletproof because there were like real world consequences for it. But also we would get stats from demos, and that's how we kept the site updated with all like the win losses, with the records for teams, like if they maintain home field, what their and of course like all the sundry stats like frag stats, flag touches, whatever.
Yeah.
And we did that by basically running a ZDaemon process that was reading a log or outputting a log, reading a demo and outputting a log, and then we processed the log as it came out with like regular expressions. And that was like a weird Rube Goldberg machine, but it mostly worked. We very rarely have problems. Most of our problems were because we didn't have good server-side logs. We would use client logs.
Yeah.
And those can be like packet lossy and out of order and stuff like that. So very occasionally we'd have to edit logs or like try somebody else's demo or something. But by and large, it worked pretty well.
But it had its limitations, like you said, because of the fact that you really couldn't depend on the server-side stuff because you had very little control over that.
Right, and like one of the things we really wanted to do was, wanted to do was like heat maps. Like I wanted to see like where people were getting fragged, like what path runners would take, like how like defenders would chase and stuff. Like you can imagine a lot of like really cool analysis that would require data that we couldn't get from a log, or couldn't get it reliably. And for that, you would need like access to the actual source code for the port. We could get it'd be really just destructive to the community if we could like see where someone got shot coordinate wise. That would just bring the whole Christmas tree down. So couldn't do that, and so we sort of like had to be content with what we had. And for like a lot of the management stuff that we wanted to do, wasn't super reliable, just because like we had to like pipe commands to a ZDaemon process and whatever, and it was just a pain. So it was a very rickety system, and not something you would design from the start. And I think like I don't know if you've managed like any other service for any other game or something like that, but it's like light years ahead of any kind of like management that we even have in like modern Doom ports now, right? Like it's still all config file based and stuff.
Yeah, and I think the best way to put it, and this is a very, very colorful way of putting it, but I think you were given chicken shit with the task of turning it into chicken salad. And you did the best you could. I mean, there were again, you had the limitations that we had. And, you know, I have so much respect for that because, like, you could have just said, this is too much work, I'm not doing it. And nobody would have been like, yeah, you know, fuck you. It's like, yeah, no, we understand. So people like you, like Ralph, that spent not a day or two, hours upon hours, days upon days, investing your free time into this. Like that's why we are where we are today. That we have a competitive game and we have the stories to tell that we have to tell about, despite all the bad things that came along with the idea, with the Doom community that existed and still exists to this day, the good things stuck because of people like you. And I personally think that you are like one of the most unappreciated people
Oh,
in Doom history because, like, you can, sure, like, you didn't come up with the league. Sure, you didn't code a port for, but like, you did a lot of things that if you weren't there, yes, could we have probably gotten other people to do this stuff? Maybe, who knows, right? But the fact of the matter, it was you. And for better or for worse, it worked out. And we've already kind of talked about some of the side stuff, like No Star, the infamous No Star, and stuff like that. There's no reason to rehash that. But you know what? It was what it was, and it's history that I love. I'm not yearning to go back to that because
no.
I cannot believe that for almost 4 straight years, from late 2009 to late 2012, for the summer and the winter, for 2.5 months straight, I dedicated myself that much to Doom.
Oh, No Star and I talk about this all the time. But like we can't. So No Star would play. I don't know, 80, 100 hours a week. If I wasn't playing, I was coding. It's
Yeah,
like I legitimately like wore my ass out
yeah.
on Doom. It was crazy.
And
Um,
I just can't. I could never go back to that. But I miss it. I love it. But yeah.
yeah, it was of an era. I would say I think Human Bones is probably more underappreciated than I am. I think Ralph gets a lot of glory, so we can.
Human Bones isn't underappreciated. Human Bones is over attacked.
Well, yeah, yeah. And I think Alex Max also doesn't get a lot of the credit he
I agree.
deserves.
I agree. Alex is another
Um,
guy.
yeah. Um, those are the people I would call out, I guess. Um, I think I don't feel underappreciated. I got a lot of stuff out of Doom. Like,
Hmm.
I got like a really good job at Rolls Royce based on some of my Doom source port coding. Weirdly, um, it's a weird story, but basically, thank you, Doom. I also learned a lot about like internet culture and a lot about like hanging out with other angry white guys, which is important when you're a software engineer. Um, uh, and it was super helpful. And also, I think just like learning to program in general, like a lot of that came from Doom. Like I had a systems admin job, but like I wasn't writing the kind of Python that like I wrote in ZDaemon. Like there's I don't know thousands of lines of code in that thing. It's nuts.
Hmm.
Or like I learned C and C++ to work on Odamex. Like I did some stuff in my job that was in C, but like I really figured out how it all worked because I was trying to figure out client-side prediction. And so I think probably more than most people, I really got a lot out of Doom. Um, and I think other people like put in as much as I did, but I just weirdly got lucky with like the kind of stuff that I did. Oh yeah, and all the web stuff too, which is my actual job now. Mostly, it's all web dev and things. So yeah, I don't. I feel like Doom was weirdly really good for me. You know, think I quit a little bit too late, but yeah, and I mean, I feel like especially like towards the end, like I had like a really good group of people who I was close to in Doom. So I like to think about that from time to time.
Yeah, same. Yeah, I think in the end, Doom for me is it's difficult to describe it because there's some very very cool things and there's some very very not so cool things.
Oh yeah.
Um, you want to know what? I have no shame in saying this. I don't have a lot of friends in real life. I have a ton of friends online, and many of them I've met in person through Doom. And
Mm,
some of them to this day are people that I consider my closest friends.
yeah.
Um, there are a lot of things in life that, while Doom didn't teach me how to do, the one thing that Doom really helped from me, and I'm not trying to like go on this really cringeworthy spiel, but
No, I love it.
I suffered a lot as a young adult, and even now as I'm a little bit older. But when I was very young in my teenage years and early adult years, I suffered a lot in like depression, anxiety, lack
Mm,
of self esteem. And through playing competitive Doom and getting really good at something, it was a way for me to learn how to channel all of those things and like use them for the good. If that sounds funny, or I don't know any other way to put it, but effectively, I got a lot of self confidence through Doom.
yeah.
And in the long run, I think that made me a better person. I spent way too much time on the game that was also destructive in my life in other areas that had a lot of consequences for it. And thankfully, I've gotten past all those things. And I understand now that, like, in my early 30s, that there is a healthy balance that you can have. You can
Mm,
have, you can like these games, you can play them competitively, but like, you need to be able to balance your life out.
yeah.
And that's why now I appreciate something like the WDL when I do play in it, because instead of grinding from anywhere from 11 to 14 weeks 2 times a year, um, it's only a 6 week league. They do a different draft where if you get drafted, you're less likely to be drafted and held hostage by a bad captain. Um, they get better, more veteran players. There's a lot of good things for it.
Nice.
But I'm at a point. I'm not putting you on the spot, but I kind of am when I ask this question. But I'm at a point where I've got some competitive juice left in me, and I want to ride that out, but I don't foresee myself doing it much longer. Do you think there's ever a point where you would come back and play competitively?
Man, I really don't think so. Like, you're talking about your archival project, like regenerating the stats and stuff. Like,
Yeah,
that's really interesting to me. I also love playing Doom, right? But like, I don't even play like regular video games anymore. You know, like
yeah,
I bought a whole bunch of old consoles. I have a bunch of old like flash cards and stuff.
yeah,
I do not play them.
yeah. Same.
Like,
They just sit
yeah,
there.
it's like, yeah. And I don't know like if like a switch flipped in me, but like I just don't do it anymore. If I had to like really drill down into it, like I think it's two things. We were talking about this earlier. I think one, like I can't get myself to dedicate the time
Yeah,
to it, and I will not be terrible at it. And
yeah.
like in order to avoid being terrible at it, I would have to put a bunch of time into it. I just like I can't do it. Like I have like websites to make for poor people. You know, I have like voting rights to protect. I have whatever. You know, I as I'm doing it, I can just feel the world become. This sounds really like soapboxy or whatever. I can feel the world becoming less just. You know, I'm like, fuck, I must
Right.
quit. You know, um, and I think like I detox and de-stress in other ways. And like say what you want about Doom, but it is not a de-stressing experience.
No, not back then it wasn't, and to some levels even now it's not, but it's better.
Yeah, yeah, and
Well,
I think like yeah, I have other strategies, but yeah, I mean, I'm not trying to tell anybody else what to do, but like, for me, I just don't think that it really fits in my life anymore.
hey, that's fair. I threw my pitch out there. But no, it's fair. I believe me. I mean, we're all older now, and I definitely understand. I mean, I was too busy. I mean, for a long time, I was just. There were times I wanted to come back. I wanted to come back in 2017. I wanted to put all the drama behind me and come back, but I just was too busy. I'm only now back on the basis that I'm back because I'm not working and going to school full time like I was. Now I'm working full time, but I have one and a half job,
Yeah,
and I've got other things that I have to take care of. Now I can make time for Doom, and I'm with you to some extent. I don't want to be a shell of my former self when I play, but I also accept that I still want to play and that I'm never going to be what I was 10 years ago because I'm not willing to play 6 to 8 hours a day.
Yeah.
Like, period. I'm just not. I will be happy with 1 to 2 hours, maybe 2 or 3 times a week, and whatever I can. I think, and I could be wrong, but I think if I do that, I won't be as good as I once was, but I could still be very competitive.
Yeah.
And should I be able to do that, if I were to play in another season of WDL or anything like that, and I felt this was competitive, I felt good, I was happy with this, I could just ride off into the sunset and say, you know what, I'm good. I don't need to play in any more events. I like this project that I'm doing. I like mapping. I like shoutcasting. I did a couple of those things with Zanero for some of the games. I like all these things. Like this is stuff that I could do. And I could still get that fulfillment of the Doom experience, but I don't have to dedicate like ridiculous amounts of time to it in order for me to do it.
Yeah.
And I think that is difficult for people, and that's kind of like what we talk about as we get older, like the post-Doom life. And everybody's is different. There are some people to this day that can still play a lot, and I respect them. There are some people like me, like Dev, that play scarcely, but when we do, we're willing to commit our time to it so long as everything fits what we like. And yeah, like we accept that we're not as good as we used to be, but there is a sense of responsibility that I have that despite that, I'm never going to use that as an excuse when I play. I'll never, because I don't want to be like the guys that came before me that were like, well, in my prime, I would have wiped the floor with you. And yes, of course, when I've been annoyed, I've said stuff like that, but I don't ever want that to be my general attitude. And the minute that becomes my general attitude, it is time for me to go.
Gotta take a step back. Yeah.
But it hasn't, and I don't foresee that being a thing. So I think that we can all have we can have a healthy relationship with Doom still, but it's individual. It depends on the individual. And look, I appreciate your honesty. You're just like, nope, not ever gonna do it. But I'll tell you this. I will say this much, and tell me if I'm wrong. I don't think that means that you have to be away from the community either. I would love to see you in the community in some way, shape, or form, because that doesn't mean you even have to do anything. Just coming around to say hi every once in a while would just be awesome. Like, it's so cool to hear from you again after so long that, like, even that in and of itself is like a really cool thing. So even if you never come back and play again, I would be fine with that. But just to have some of these old guys come back and say hi to them and talk to them, that's still something. So you are more than welcome to come to any part of the Doom community you want, the MDF, the WDL, and anybody and everybody would love your presence there.
I appreciate that.
So, yeah, I obviously it's different. I tried to get No Star. I told Jake this years ago. I said, you need to get No Star to come back, and we need to play like some NSCTF. That's when he mentioned the story about No Star's too busy with his garden.
Yeah, he legit has a jungle. He's not making that up.
And I just thought that was the funniest thing. Like, here you have like this, you know, what everybody described as like the tyrannical, massive Titan No Star that like ran the Doom community with an iron fist. Nah, he's just chilling somewhere. Like, it's like Thanos, like in the Avengers and Endgame. He's just chilling on his planet, like picking shit out of his garden. Like, that's just No Star. Now he's just chilling, picking tomatoes, picking cucumbers. He's just chilling. Yeah. He's happy.
He's got a couple of cats.
He's always a cat, dude. I mean, and look, my invitation extends to him too. The good, the bad, or whatever. I genuinely liked No Star, so I would love to hear from him again. So if he ever wants to come on and do a podcast, or if he ever wants to, come back and play, I'm all ears. I would love to talk to him.
I'll pass it on, but he will say no.
I'm sure. I get the sense that he's the guy that once he's done with something, he's done.
Yeah.
And there's no going back. But I got to make the pitch. You know how it goes.
Sure. Of course.
But yeah, man, I think that's gonna close it out. I just want to say I am so grateful that you took the time to come and do this with me. It was awesome to catch up with you. Moreover, I think it's awesome what you're doing in your real life. We talked a little bit about that, or quite a bit actually, before we did this podcast. We actually spoke for like an hour before we even got on, and we're like, man, we've got like all this good content that we didn't even record, but whatever. What you're doing in life is awesome, and I respect the hell out of you for it.
Thank you.
I've always had a lot of respect for you. I think you and I have always looked at the world much the same way. So I just got to say, man, big ups. Keep doing what you're doing. Is there anything else you want to say? Anything you want to get off your chest? Any person you want to call out?
No, thank you for reaching out to me. It was cool to catch up with you, and I super respect what you're doing too.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, I don't know. I would shout out Ralphus. I think, like, if you're going to give anybody a trophy for Doom, it's that guy.
Hell yeah.
Know? I don't know anybody who loves Doom more than he does, who's been in the community longer, who's held in, more high regard than anybody. Like, just amazing. Like, you can tell, like, by the kind of people that come around him, like, he's a good guy. So, yeah, that's probably it.
Hell yeah, dude. That's what I'm talking about. All right, man. We're going to wrap this up. I'm going to cut this off. Thanks again, Ladna, Charlie, whatever you want to be called. I'll call you Charlie, but, the community is always going to know you as Ladna. We fucking love you. Thank you so much. This is going to wrap up the Dead Simple podcast with Ladna. Thanks again for listening, everybody, and stay tuned to the next one. Big shout out to Ladna. Thanks, everybody, for taking the time to listen again. I realize that this podcast had a lot of detail regarding ZDaemon and the administration in the past, so I do want to be clear that the purpose of this wasn't to pick on them or point out things about them that are negative, because there are positives too. I mean, the ZDaemon staff was responsible for working with us in some aspects, but overall, that was our experience, and we were just reflecting on it. I would also say that nowadays, in the culture of multiplayer Doom, ZDaemon is pretty cooperative with the MDF, so I wouldn't paint the picture of them as the bad guys any longer, but in the past they certainly had things that were less than desirable, and that's all we were really doing is talking about it, so I don't want anybody to get the wrong idea. That's it for this week. I was really happy to have Ladna on. It's really cool to get a chance to shoot the shit with somebody you haven't talked to in a long time, and him and I were never super close, but we knew each other pretty well, and we would talk off and on, so it's great to hear that he's doing good. I look forward to talking to him in the future. Now, for next podcast, I'm going to be having on the infamous, legendary Ty, who I like to call Mr. Reliable because he shows up for every single Doom event ever. The guy is 20 years going strong. I can't wait to talk to him. He's another guy that I've talked with off and on for the last, forever, but I've never been super close with, so I'm pretty excited to have that conversation with him and all of the memes that go with it. So, once again, big shout out to Ladna. Thanks again, guys. Stay tuned, and we will see you later.